Hi, listeners. Do you want to introduce us, Mukisa, or should I
Nah, this
continue?
is this is on you
Go
because
for
I
it.
did the first two. I did the
I
first
did it.
three,
Okay.
maybe.
Yeah, I was shy. But hey, listeners, what's up? What's up? What's up? You're listening to the Pink Notice podcast. You're listening to Akaman Jezi and my esteemed co-host, Mukisa Mujilizi, who is speaking now.
Hi.
And what are we going to talk about today, Mukisa?
Today we've got a few interesting things. So this episode is going to be a lovely little one specifically for our South African listeners, especially if you're a South African who's voted, a South African that's interested in politics like writ large. I think what we're going to do is try to do a series on breaking down each political party's manifesto. Now, when I say each political party, I'm not like there's so many that we can't cover them all, and a lot of them, to be honest, aren't like statistically significant.
Mm.
And when they do become statistically significant, we'll cover them. But we'll stick to like the major political parties, the big players, the ANC, the DA, the EFF, MK now as well. We'll go into the FFP because holy shit, they're a nightmare. There's a few other political parties, but today I thought we should just stick to hearing about the DA and the ANC's manifesto initially, because I think there's a lot to discuss there.
Mm.
And if we have enough time, we'll then get into the parliamentary debate that happened, I believe now about a month ago, and just kind of see what that debate garnered, what the political parties were sort of saying to each other, what they were arguing about, and ultimately what their message for the future of South Africa being shared was. So that's what we'll go through today.
Exciting. And
Yeah.
listeners, this is my episode to just listen and ask questions and add insight where I have. So yeah.
So, listeners, I thought, it might be nice to go over the parties' manifestos. Now, I'm not going to do a deep, comprehensive dive into those parties' manifestos, even individually in terms of the ANC and the DA. But I do know that generally speaking, 99% of my friends who voted in the last elections did not read up on the particular parties' manifestos. They probably had no idea specifically what it was they were voting for. I think most people were voting based on ideology and
Mm.
just general know-how. So I've decided to split these manifestos, and specifically the ANC and the DA, into 5 categories. And the 5 categories are crime and corruption, economy, jobs, education, and energy. I picked those specifically because I think those are the most sort of salient. I think people are generally trying to keep up with those specific things with regards to South Africa. Like those are the core issues. Land is also
Yeah.
one of them, but I think land is something that I want to bring up and discuss more specifically when we get to the EFF and the MK, because they're more
Okay.
radical than the DA and the ANC when it comes to land
Mm.
redistribution and those policies. So the format that I'm going to follow is I'm going to give you a mini explanation as to why crime and corruption or what one of the other 5 categories is important, and then we'll just go into like a sentence or two into what the DA and the ANC support and what they claimed in their manifesto, and then we'll have a mini discussion on that. So each section will have its own little bits and pieces. So crime and
Yeah.
corruption. I think crime and corruption is one of those important things because it's central to South Africa's governance. I think we've not
Yes, it
not
is. It is
heard corruption.
central.
Yeah, like we haven't heard the term I don't think there's been a year that we haven't heard corruption in the election
Yeah,
cycle,
no.
maybe since like post Nelson Mandela. Like I like that's just always there. Like that never
Yeah.
disappears even slightly. And I do think what's important here is that like you can't divorce the history of apartheid from a South African's understandings of corruption and the way that it's sort of played out, and also the marriage of corruption and race. How most in
Mm.
like South Africans tend to, and actually let me be specific here, most white South Africans tend to see corruption as a racial issue, whether they're doing it implicitly or explicitly. When they hear corruption, they're picturing a black politician who's just been caught for stealing something. Like that's the image, that's the
Yes.
idea. I
Yeah.
think Trevor Noah even like made a joke in one of his earlier comedy specials about the Oscar Pistorius situation, when Oscar Pistorius had claimed that like 3 men I think broke into his house and then shot Reba Steenkamp.
Yes. Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
was like, you all thought it was 3 black men. Nobody told you what their race
Yeah.
was, but in your head you had 3 black men. And so that's that's why I think crime and corruption is super important here. But I also think it's really fun because, or funny, or ironic rather, because this is somewhere where the ANC are like, they want more policing,
Mm.
which I don't know how much specific number of police is an issue. I mean, if this was true, then the United States would be the safest country on the planet, and it's just objectively
Yeah,
not.
no, it is
So I don't know
not.
how more policing is going to help. They're also for adequate resourcing of community policing forums, which I don't mind. Like that's a policy that I'm like,
Mm.
that makes sense. Community policing is something
Yeah.
that I'm very much for. I think a lot of even African countries, at least in Tanzania, the police
Mm.
are just not visible. You don't really see them. You'll see traffic cops, but you won't see the actual police. And that's because a lot of it is community policed. You know, like obviously you go to the police to put in a report or something, but if someone steals something, like the community will catch that person, assuming they're seeing them in broad daylight. It's usually like a really big commotion. It's like a whole thing. But it's not as like physical presence from the state. It's literally mostly from the people. And the way like these things are sort of governed is that like most of our communities know each other through church, through whatever it might be, like group meetings on Saturdays. Like it's a very community-based, we're here for each other type of system. So that's why I'm like, okay, cool. ANC, that's a good policy. Good job on your ideas. And then one of the things that I red flagged was priority area policing through data analysis. Can you guess why I red flagged that?
Facial,
so it's basically just
putting cameras everywhere?
No, it's basically just seeing what statistics have historically been present in which areas, and then more policing in those areas.
But that assumes policing is the solution to that problem.
Precisely. It also profiles. It's pretty much exactly what the US has done. It's just basically profiling. It's the cat that eats its own tail. We're going to increase policing in this neighborhood because statistically...
More police, if there are more police, if there are no police, there will be no crime. Crime is defined.
Exactly.
Police define what crime is.
Exactly.
Like police being able to catch this crime, because crime is the thing that is actually like, the crime is a thing. So like if there's no one there to witness said crime happening, or no one there to categorize this thing as crime, like there is no crime. So the more police you have, the more people there are available to see crime happening, more instances of crime that will be noted down. And like crime may be uniform everywhere, but where there are more police, you will therefore just find more crime, because that's where that's where the crime lookers are. Yeah,
exactly. No, 100%. That's exactly right. Like that's literally the biggest issue. It's literally the snake that eats its own tail. It's just it goes round and round in circles. So that's why I was like, that's a red flag. That's not gonna work. That's not something. But there are certain policies in here that I go, yeah, that's something just to appease opposing political parties. They're trying to sort of cover their own ass instead of something that they might actually believe or want to do. I green flagged that they want to strengthen economic infrastructure task teams, which I think is going to the root of what crime and poverty is. What is that? Economic infrastructure task teams. Now, what I presume this to mean is that they're essentially going to say, okay, crime is also as a result largely due to poverty. So those two things are linked. So economic infrastructure teams, I believe, are there to essentially go, hey, hang on, this isn't a policing issue in this area. We actually need to improve the material conditions of the people living here in order to then improve said crime. So I'm like, that's an objectively good thing. I don't know how that squares with the prior thing of like priority area policing. I'm like, those two things are contradictory, but this is why I say, like, in manifestos, sometimes they just say shit just to be like, yeah, this is out there.
Yeah.
And then the final thing is the sort of deep irony of this: a social compact against corruption, make the investigating directorate a permanent body, which I believe it's not a permanent thing now, where they're just kind of investigating politicians that commit corruption. But I think I said this is ironic because, again, the first message or the last message on the ANC's website, which is that we've been in power ever since.
Yeah, so why aren't you doing that?
Exactly.
It's like when the Democrats are like Roe v. Wade, just like make sure that it can't be overturned. Like,
exactly.
Like you can stop something. This thing from happening. That you're like, you're just like, let's have this thing happen. It's like, okay, then do it. Like, what's stopping you from doing it now? Like, why must I vote for you to do this thing? You can do it now without you can do it today.
You don't
have
need
to wait
me.
until
like you're in
the
power.
next election. You can do it right now. But you're telling me I must vote for you to do this thing that you can do it now, even though you can do it now and you're not doing it. Like, why? Like, do you even want to do this thing? It's just going to be a carrot that's going to dangle forever and ever and ever. Like,
exactly.
We can do this, guys. Come, keep running. Let's go.
Exactly. So this is where my issue lies, is that the carrot that they're dangling in front of people saying that we're going to do this thing, without doing it, is that their numbers are dwindling. Their support numbers, their majority has dwindled. It has fucking dipped. And in large part in this election due to the MK taking a whole host of their votes, but their numbers have been dipping for a long while. And so if they're going to keep dangling this idea that like, we'll do better while they keep losing votes, I think the political tactic that they might take is to do what the Democrats do, which is to constantly essentially institute a state of emergency, so to speak, which is to say that like this next election is the most important election of your life. You have to vote. Ignore what you're voting for. Just vote for us and we'll change the thing, because we're losing numbers. So you need to do better to stop us from losing numbers. without telling people that like we're the reason why the thing exists as it exists. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the biggest issue that I think I have with the ANC, which isn't new. I mean, I don't know. Their whole party is just one big fucking clusterfuck. Like they've taken a party that was the liberators of apartheid. They've taken the honest to God, like true, deep emotional support that Black South Africans have given to them because of what they've done for them in the past, and they're abusing that. And that's what fucking sucks to me. That's what like burns me. It's like you have the political power now. Do something better for Black South Africans. Because what's actually now happening is you're losing a decent chunk of Black South Africans to the DA who might be aware or might not be aware that what they're essentially voting for now is a party that is going to be specifically far more focused on 10% of the country than they are going to be on 90% of the country. You're pushing the country to the right. When you already won the Overton window race, like we should be going in the other direction. Why are you going that way? You know? And that's one of the sort of sad things that I sort of feel about the ANC, and like their whole crime and corruption sort of section is just like, it's almost a joke at this point, because it's like, it
is.
Yeah.
It's like you don't, we know about all this crime and corruption that's going on within your party. Nothing seems to be happening about that. So like, are you serious about crime and corruption? Like what evidence, where are the receipts that you're actually serious about this crime and corruption, that you want to tackle it?
Exactly.
You don't seem to be serious. So like, why should I believe you? Like, why? Like, no.
And okay, so now we'll move on to the DA's sort of crime and corruption policies, which is their first thing, which is to decentralize policing to, and I quote, capable provincial and metro governments, which I'm like, I put capable in quotes because what does that mean? Like, what do you
define capable?
Like, how do you define exactly? Like, who are you choosing to, like, who is capable? Like, how do you define that? And also decentralizing policing. I can understand. I'm a big proponent of decentralization just because I think it often leads to better policy building within certain specific spaces. But I also see the dangers of removing national power in order to give individual sort of provinces individual powers to make decisions, because that then can lead to, you know, factualization and all that shit. So I'm like, this is a bit iffy. I don't fully trust this. They also want to reduce the bloated SAPS management, their salaries and their lifestyles. They said they want lifestyle audits for cops, and which I'm like, cool, that 100%. You know, horrible moment when somebody.
But also, what does that mean?
What do you mean? Lifestyle audit.
Like on cops, like cops who, like regular cops who work, or like just like on the cops who like are more administrative or managerial staff, or like because it's quite a weird like labor dynamic there, in which you have like the state, like they're there to protect capital really and property and all these things. Like that is the role of the police, and but the people who are doing this enforcing are laborers, and it's like lifestyle audits to I don't know to what who are these lifestyle audits being done on, and like I guess is a question, because
essentially I think what they're trying to do is trying to decrease corruption on the lowest level, which I
think is a great that's okay, cool, but like who's allowing that corruption to happen? Do you think the people at the top just don't know?
Exactly. Missing the forest for the trees again. It's like you're going after the wrong area. But to be fair to the DA, they did say they want to reduce the budgets for senior management, which I guess they are showing that they are going for the top and the bottom. It's kind of like a, you know, both sides type of approach. So this is one of those things where I was like, okay, fair enough. DA, cool. That makes sense. Appointing a new police watchdog. They're kind of vague about this, but just to basically say, because I don't know what they mean by police. Do you mean nationally? Do you mean just like, you know, each province has their own watchdog? And then what is this watchdog's role? Like what are they doing specifically? Like, are they specifically watching senior management, or like you said, are they watching the laborers? Like what's specific to these? What does this watchdog, what's their role?
Also, if they're both like by the government, like I don't know, I think like civil society, like civil organizations that do the watchdogging kind of makes more sense to me, because if the police and the watchdog, like if the same person gets to decide who gets to head both organizations, and those people can also switch roles. Like, you're like, we're here to police you. We're here to like, it's like, you guys are chums though. You guys are like, so it's like, what? Like, I'm watching you. It's like, what's happening here?
This is one of those things where I'm like, I want something, because it's one of those things that's presented as just like an objective good. You want somebody who's there, who's independent, who can actually keep an eye on this. But the question is, what does that actually look like?
Why do you need to keep an eye?
Well, I mean, I assume they're like the corruption which is occurring under the SAPS and stuff is too great. I assume that's what they're.
Oh no, I guess what I'm saying is that like, if this thing you're doing is working properly, you shouldn't need to have an eye to be watching this. So like, why not do like a whole, like do a commission, do a whole investigation into like the corruption, sort out the corruption. And now instead of like creating this watchdog organization that could eventually also itself fall privy to corruption, let, I guess, civil society do that, or like, I mean, or journalists, or like let the media do its role, I guess, because I don't know if it works when people get to police themselves, when organizations, when big structures get to, I guess this is like one department to another department, but I don't really think that works that well. Generally speaking.
No, I'm with you. Again, it's like you're not going for the root. You're trying to cover up the symptoms, and you're not going for the disease.
Yes.
And we need you to fix the disease. And a part of me thinks that the DA is kind of there as an opposition party. Anything that's sort of negative that is happening is good for you politically. Any bad thing that is occurring is just objectively good for you, because you need that bad thing to win votes so that people can be like, oh, okay, let me vote for you and see what you can do. So I think there's like, I don't know, motive, implicit or explicit, it doesn't matter. It's there to almost maintain the system and not cure the symptom, because again, curing the symptom would mean having to focus on the deep inequality in South Africa, because again, crime and corruption, deeply tied to inequality, deeply tied to poverty. And so I think it's like we have to, if we were to go for the root causes, we'd have to acknowledge a whole bunch of shit that we're now wanting to stay the same without actually going to fix it, you know? And that's one of the things that I always find kind of funny about the DA and conservatism in general. They're willing to sort of shout and be like, this is a problem, but then their solutions are like, no, that's not going to fix that. That's not something that you actually need to be changed. And then a few good things, take a victim-centered approach. I think that's really good. I think when they're specifically to gender-based violence, this was on that, like they want to center the victims in these conversations, because I do believe that South Africa does have a policing problem, especially when it comes to gender-based violence, especially when it comes to monitoring, offering safety kits, rape kits. And then again, they want to disband the state security agency and start a fresh intelligence agency, which I'm not sure why. I don't understand that particular part of South African politics enough to know why that's an issue, and maybe we can look into that in the future. But when it comes to state security agencies, I tend to have a distrust of them purely because of the CIA and their role in the United States. Actually, all of the fucking three-letter organizations in the US have led me to distrust
the alphabet mafia.
Yeah, exactly. Like I have zero trust for any state-sanctioned security councils and shit. Like I don't trust them. It's just Anyway, so that's crime and corruption.
It does go contrary to like what, like people elect this body, and then this body does things that that the people don't get to know about and don't get to have a say in, and it's like higher than thou. Like, no, don't worry, people who elected us, it's not important to you what we're doing.
Exactly.
That we can do it, or like let the big people handle it. Just vote every 4 years and chill. But I guess it does also interesting, because I guess countries do have adversaries, and I guess there is a value in like having an organization to, like, countries do have adversaries. Do they need to? But like, they're having an organization that its role is to, like, I don't know, or part of the role is to combat those adversaries. But I don't know if that's the best way to do it, because that's like, okay, we kind of need to be secret so that the bad guys don't know what we're doing. That also means we're being secret from our populace. That also means that we can then do crazy things, like for the CIA's case, MK Ultra and stuff. And not get held to account. Have like so it's like a catch-22 vibe. Just like, maybe let's be less. Maybe we're doing things that are making us have adversaries, and we should stop doing those things that make us have adversaries, so that we don't need to have these agencies that are unaccountable to the people that elect us.
And I'm also curious as to, like, in this case, they're wanting to disband the old security agency. Is that motivated by what you just said, which is pointing out the sort of gray area that they tend to exist in? Or is it by the political understanding that they have zero control over the current security agency and they just want to start a new one in order to gain some semblance of control over that? You know what I mean?
If I recall correctly, there was quite a bit of corruption happening in the SSA, especially around Zuma's time. I think I don't recall the exact detail, but I think that they're wanting to disband is probably just to, like, hammer approach to the corruption is endemic within this one agency. So we're going to disband this one. We're going to create our own, and they're going to create their own because I think they may still ostensibly believe in the role of some sort of state security agency, but they just think not this one's too far gone. Perhaps.
I love that.
But I'm saying perhaps that's what their motivation is.
And so let's get into the economy in particular, because I think this one will garner some conversation. But to highlight why the economy is important to South Africa, I mean, the basics of it is just that, like, the general idea idea is that a healthy, thriving economy means a healthy, thriving country. That's not true of South Africa. In fact, it's not true of America either, but it's not true of South Africa in this specifically. Because often when economy comes up, they're referring specifically to the stock market and how well, I guess, the wealthiest individuals in the country, how well their money is doing as a result of like the general cash flow within the country. So they're not really thinking about the rest of the sort of poor country that doesn't have any sort of footing in terms of the stock market in particular.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same as when people talk about the GDP. It's like the averages there obscure what the realities of it is. So any economic policy, anything that doesn't specifically point to what is known as the Gini coefficient, which is a coefficient that calculates essentially a country's inequality index. It's essentially just to say this is how unequal this country is. South Africa is like in the top 10 easily throughout the world. They are one of the most unequal countries on the planet. So to say South Africa's economy is healthy is just false, but also to say the economy is unhealthy but not point to the inequality is also false. It's like if it doesn't do that, then you're not really tackling the problem.
Yes, because like how do you get you want to get the economy better, but you want to talk about redistribution of land. So it's like all you really care about is that the rich get better, get richer. You don't really care about solving this like other issue of like, oh, people just don't live places, they can't eat, they can't basic necessities that you may take for granted, they just can't do. That's not important. Exactly. What's important to you is that like number go up.
Number go way up. So with the ANC in particular, they're very big on industrialization to be a key driver of growth, which I'm also for. Get as many factories up and out there as possible, just as long as those workers are unionized and paid fairly. I'm all game for that. One of their biggest things is that they want to protect the steel industry. I need to do more research in terms of like protect them from what, but the steel industry holds 5% is currently contributing to 5% of South Africa's GDP. So it's huge. So I guess that's why they were like, it's kind of massive. So if you want to protect them, go ahead. They also, and this is one of the things that I green flagged, they want to develop an ecosystem of state banks in national, provincial, and economic sectors, including a human settlement bank, which is what we brought up with regards to the conversation with Vela and VBS and the type of bank that it was and so on and so forth. So just to give a clear statement here on what a state bank is a bank, a financial institution where the state, municipality, or public actors are the primary owners. So it's under it's an enterprise under control of the government. And the reason I green flagged this is because there's many examples of this succeeding in Germany, I believe in the Netherlands. There's many countries that have state banks. It's not an objectively bad thing. I think most people just associate any state institution in South Africa specifically with corruption. So putting state and bank together, most people are like, whoa, you want to put the money in their hands? And it's like, that's not exactly how it works.
My question is, are these state banks in particular banks that allow citizens to deposit their funds with the bank? Because I guess we do have the Reserve Bank, and so that's distinct from I guess, what is the Reserve? What do you call that kind of a bank?
The Reserve Bank, I guess, it would be the bank that like holds our currency. It is our bedrock.
They set like the interest rates. They do the whole like managing the thing. But I guess my question was, that's what makes a national bank a state. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
no. That's not my question. Is that like the difference is that normal citizens can bank with said bank, because I can't open an account at the Reserve Bank. I have to go to one of the commercial banks or a mutual bank, I guess. But in these instances, this would be a state that runs a bank that
citizens can buy into. Yes. Or at least put their money,
deposit their funds in. Okay.
Yeah. So that's what they're pushing for. And I'm like, that makes sense. To be honest, and listeners, you need to know this. Anything privatized, I distrust. In like absolute terms. I just distrust it. And that's not to say I'm entirely against it. That's not to say that I think every single system thing in the economy needs to be publicly owned, but that is to say that I have a level of distrust for privatization. And therefore, if you're trying to tell me that you want to have more state-owned banks, it means that private banks can have less of a monopoly. It means that a lot of the freaking requirements that they have, for instance, like high fees for just putting your money. We pay rent when we have a bank, right? Like that's just what it is. We pay like a little fee, and most people can't afford that. And I've always found it weird because like in Tanzania we have mobile money. You don't even have to keep your money in a bank. You can just keep it on your SIM card is your bank, and you can keep money on there. And you can text money to people. You can get it back. Obviously, there's certain fees when you're sending money, but when you're taking out cash, there's no fees. Like it's a really good system. Yeah, it's like a really helpful system. So you don't actually have to pay rent to keep your money, in a specific bank. Obviously, I do recommend you do so, I think, or at least don't keep all your eggs in one basket. But in this instance,
what if your phone gets stolen? But I bank with Discovery, so I don't know how to answer that question in my case. Like, what happens if my phone gets stolen? I have no idea. I don't know what I do. I literally don't know what the next steps are.
In order to have a SIM card this side, obviously, I think in South Africa as well, you're registered with your ID or whatever.
Oh, so then that's how they switch it.
So,
okay.
You can just switch it. So it's not tied to the SIM card physically. It's just, So I think this is just one of those policies where I'm like all for. I'm like this. We need to increase state action that benefits the civilians, as long as that's what this is. Because I haven't gone into the sort of in depth of what this is. So now we're getting into the DA, and this is a big red flag. Their first policy is to remove race as a criteria and replace it with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Now, the reason why I red flagged this is because they're basically saying in this one statement that race, and they did this, and you can go read their manifesto. It's very clear. It's like big and bold. They're pitching it like it's some brand new idea. But their argument is that BEE and BBBBB, whatever, doesn't work. They're saying that focusing on race is doing nothing but dividing the country. And I'm putting that in air quotes to the listeners. And so they're like, we need to remove race from these calculations entirely. We need to focus on sustainable development goals, which, by the way, that has zero answers to how you're going to solve the inequality problem. So that's why I put it as like a massive red flag. If you want to stick to the UN's SDGs, then you essentially need to be in a country that isn't as unequal as ours is. Like in a very realistic
it's like making it seem like we're all running this, playing this. It's like not adapting the solution to your context. It's like saying, no, let's just use this one thing for everyone, even though like a major thing happened in 1994. So before the before and after, it's quite drastic, the change, and like this needs to be remedied somehow. And we don't do that by doing the same thing that everyone else is doing. Maybe we can do that once we do our own specific thing that gets us to an equal footing, more of us to an equal footing, and then we can do the whole universal thing. But like, surely you need a targeted approach to fix problems that were targeted. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's literally that's the number one key issue that I had with this policy, is that the DA are trying to be race blind. They're trying to say, and they're using the black politicians that they have in their political party to spew this as well. But they're essentially trying to say that like, hey, look, South Africa, it's been 30 years after apartheid. We need to stop hearing about this apartheid thing, and we need to shift towards what the global economy and market is doing. And what they're not doing is they're not giving a specific race in their country benefits over others, and they're not whatever. And that sort of reverse racism argument and whatnot. The DA are basically doing that, where they're like crying about BEE when it's like, okay, well, I understand having criticisms towards specifically BEE, but to say that we need to have a race blind approach is insane. It's just objectively untrue. That's just not how this country's context exists in, to quote Kamala.
No, agreed.
So it's like precisely what you said. And then the next thing I red flagged was no new taxes. Now, I'm not a tax fucking genius. But the idea that you don't want to basically implement any new taxation at all, like across the board, like that's nuts to me. Like that, I don't understand what that means.
Yeah, would they just then improve enforcement of current tax law? Like how, like if they need to get more money into the states back, like how does that jive? How do they do that?
So they don't mean no new taxes as in we're not going to continue with tax collection. They just mean
I mean like I'm saying that like I understand that part. I guess my question is that like no new tax.
Yeah, it was very vague.
Yeah, do they just want to enforce the current laws better? Is that their problem? And they're saying that the current tax structure is fine, but it's just not being enforced well enough. We're going to enforce it better? Or they're just saying that like everything that's happening now is fine and like let's just keep what's going now regarding tax?
My theory is that everything that's happening now regarding tax, from the DA's perspective and from my limited knowledge, is that everything that's happening now is actually kind of fine working for us. If anything, we want to revert it as much as possible, and we want to reduce the amount of taxes that are sort of for the richest of the country. But that's also a negative policy. And in terms of the Overton window, you're not going to win an election by telling South Africans that we're going to stop taxing the rich. So I think their like decision there was to be like, let's just not change anything. Let's just not say that we're going to reverse anything, and let's just not say that we're going to change anything in particular, because they're like, we're not going to win the election that way. So let's just keep it as is. You know what I mean? Which politically, I guess that makes sense. And then some of the more standard stuff, which is they want to stabilize debt control. I mean, they want to stabilize debt, which is a very conservative thing, but we've discussed this many times. Money's fake.
Well, yeah, but I think like
in our case,
I think that's only true for like I think
America.
I really do think that like America is really unique in this aspect in which like they own the global currency. Like that is the currency in which like currently, so like they have a lot of power, and I think what if we end up believing or like enforcing that like properly, we could end up like Zimbabwe, or
we would get fucked,
just like print money and then just like go off the rails. So I do think they're like powers. Like, yes, money is made up, but like unfortunately there are rules.
Yes, for us.
That we have to abide by, else like a lot of people would get fucked if we didn't.
The only other country that I would say also has an exception to the rule might be China, and that's because they're trying to increase their sort of global, I guess, standing because of BRICS. They're ultimately trying to shift the BRICS countries away from dollar dependency and shift it towards the Chinese currency. And so I think when it comes to that conversation of like who has the power to actually do this, America for sure, China a little bit. The rest of us, we don't have that luxury. So stabilizing debt is just an objectively smart thing to do. What that means and how that sort of is going to be implemented, I'm curious to know. I'm also wondering specifically who we're in debt with and essentially how much do we owe as a country? Like, what, you know, how fucked are we really? Like, how, like, you know what I mean? Like, how bad is it? And then the other things were they want to control spending and fix state-owned enterprises, which is just basically their way of saying the ANC has done a bad job. We need to do a better one, which I can't disagree with. Like, that's not something I'm like against.
No, I agree that is true.
It's like one of those things where it's like, yes, like sure. You know what I mean? Like it's not
fair enough.
So that's the economy. And I know that was a surprisingly little on it, but they don't actually speak too much on the economy in particular because they focus more on jobs, because I think that's most salient to South Africans. I think that's more like really important. And the important thing about the jobs, actually, let me read you the official unemployment rate in South Africa. So it was 32.9% in the first quarter of 2024. And by the way, that 32.9% isn't just like general population. That's like people of working age and have the ability to work. That's a huge number.
1 every 3 people you see.
Yeah. And it indicates that the number of employed persons increased by 22,000 up to 16.7 million in the first quarter, which is an improvement. But like, that's crazy. Like this is a country of like, I think 50 million plus people. Like that's like, it needs to do a much better job. Like that's just one of those things where the ANC find themselves constantly on the defensive when it comes to their manifesto, whereas a lot of other political parties are like, hey, here's what we're putting forward. The ANC have to constantly be like, oh, we tried to do this and we're going to try to do more of whatever, which really does put them on the back foot in a very interesting way. But their position here is to quote unquote, create 2.5 million state-funded work opportunities in delivering public goods and services, which is vague, to say the least. They're not clear in their manifestos as to how they're going to do this. And also because of the vagueness of it, I mean, this is something that they've promised before and they haven't delivered in their past manifestos. So this isn't anything like, this is one of those things which I think is just to appease voters and be like, look, they're trying to do something, but it really doesn't mean anything, to be honest. And then the other thing was target 1 million work opportunities for township and village small enterprises, entrepreneurs and co-ops, which is essentially just to try to increase the sort of position or standings of like small businesses, specifically in townships. And like, this is something that I'm like, 100%. All for that's just good. Well done on discussing that. There are a few other things that were particularly important because the ANC is on the defensive, a lot of what they say is just like, you're saying you want to do this in your manifesto, but you're not currently doing that and you're in power. So that there's no point in discussing this, to be honest. Which brings us to, I think, the funniest and most important one that you're going to love about the DA. So we're shifting over to the DA. Do you remember we listened to a podcast and they mentioned something about the DA wanting to essentially bring back slave labor? They obviously didn't like mean it. Like, they're not going to explicitly say that.
Oh,
but that's,
yes. I know
basically what they argued. Do you remember that?
This. Yes.
Yeah. Can you quickly refresh us on what that was, just briefly?
I think they want people to be able to like elect to not have certain labor rights applied to them, like the minimum wage or like working hours or like sick leave, like all these things that like you have just by virtue of being a worker. They want people to be like, no, not me. I'm fine with like earning below minimum wage, which like who is saying yes to that? Like, think about how seriously fucked they are.
Yeah, how
Like, and
desperate you
like,
must
why do you
be.
want to like have a government that like enables people to take advantage of said people? Because like,
Yeah.
if you're paying someone below minimum wage, you're not only like you're extra taking advantage, like extra, like that is
Yes.
like how much are you? Like, it's like, no, it's
And what's
insane.
interesting here is that, like, I was even looking at the US, and the US doesn't even have this because obviously, I mean, they don't have a lot of union power. Also, like, their workers are not very well protected. Plus, if I do believe that, like, if you get arrested, it's still part of the, I can't remember which amendment it is. It might have been the 14th. But basically, in the United States, if you become a federal prisoner,
It
you
was the
are essentially a
13th.
slave laborer. The 13th.
I don't
It's one
know.
of
I
those.
remember
I
there's that Ava
remember the
DuVernay
documentary.
documentary about it.
Yes. Yeah. You guys should go watch
Yeah.
that. Essentially, you're gonna be working for pennies on the dollar in prison. You're not earning even slightly remotely enough to live a basic like human life, even to afford like basic things like bread. And so it is just basically slave labor. What the DA is essentially asking for here, and one of their big things in their manifesto, is to, quote, deregulate the labor market to create jobs. So their argument is basically to say we need to decrease regulation on companies so that people can ultimately opt out of the sort of labor market laws, which is basically to say that if there's a minimum wage, I'm opting out of that. If there's healthcare, I'm opting out of that. If there's whatever, I'm opting out of that because I'm in such a desperate position. I need to work. So just take advantage of me, basically. That's their argument in a nutshell, which is
That's
fucking
bananas.
crazy.
That is like insane. It's like, what are you actually saying yes to here? What are you advocating for
This is
here?
what I'm
Because,
saying.
like, do you not
Oh
understand?
my
Like, yeah,
God.
literally what I said a few seconds ago. But I think it's like demented, evil. I mean, you're evil to take advantage of people to that degree, and like you're demented for saying that like this is actually okay. This is a,
Yeah,
we want more companies that like don't want to pay their workers enough to live. Like, that's what we want. To have a better, to have more jobs, just so that the jobs number goes up, right? We
just so
want
it goes up.
people
Yeah,
to like these jobs mean less, right? These jobs
yeah,
don't mean that you can. I mean, like what was that stat like that? It was something about like that like the average job can't afford the average rent in a given city. Like the
right.
average salary can't afford that. And it's just like so where is people meant to live? Like I mean, right?
Exactly.
It's like not it's missing. Like what is the point of a job? Is it just like is a job not so that you can have enough money to sustain yourself and your family if you have one, or
Yes,
like what like,
to
or is it just
exist,
so that
really.
you can just make the numbers look better? Is that what a job is for? Like just so that you can like elect to like just be able to like have some food but not enough to live, or you can have one of the
Exactly.
few necessities but not like all of them, or like yeah, and then and it's not like it's not even like at the same time they're also advocating for like some sort of social welfare program where people get like
Yes.
either like I mean on the very like I mean either a UBI or like nationalized healthcare or like
Yep.
free schooling, like all these things that like okay sure maybe we can't do X, but there's like a food bank where you can get food from, so like sure
Mm.
like, that's in my head I'm just saying that that's demented. Like who has those policies? Like no one has those two policies in the same thing. Because they just don't make sense. Like you're saying that like I can have less rights but also that I can get free like what are you like why don't you just
Yes.
enforce my rights so I can get the food myself, or
Exactly.
like maybe there's that too, free food, but also these well enforced rights, like maybe it's like weird. It's I don't know.
No, it's
It's
not even weird.
shady.
It's fucking.
It's
It's
fucked up.
nefarious as shit.
It is very
It's
nefarious.
I was thinking about it. I was like, even the Republicans, they openly state, obviously, they want to deregulate their market, but not to this extent. Like, I think it's
Mm.
because as a country, and actually, I'll get into the more specific weeds of it, of what they said. And this is from their manifesto, which is that they want to exempt small and medium businesses from bargaining councils, which in South Africa, it's basically like trade unions and employers organizing to apply for bargaining. It's essentially just a way for them to ensure that, like, trade unions to ensure that their workers aren't being mistreated.
Mm.
They want to remove specifically small and medium businesses from that. Now, that's
Of the
interesting
businesses in
because
Africa, like what percentage do you know like of the labor force is employed by small and medium? Because like what if that's like
I don't.
70%? And
Yeah,
like
but
the
I'd imagine it's
30%
the
just a
majority.
larger like what
I would
like
imagine it's the majority. Yeah.
yeah,
Which is
interesting.
that's why I'm like, that's a bit fucked. Now, how are you defining small and medium businesses?
I think it might be headcount linked. I think it is,
Okay.
it very well could be headcount and not revenues.
Yeah.
Because I guess if it was revenues, if a company did a shit year like the next year, like, does
Yeah.
that mean they're now a small business all of a sudden, which doesn't really make sense. It probably is headcount.
Yeah. But to be
Yeah,
honest, it doesn't, like, I'm like, regardless, it doesn't fucking matter how you
yeah,
define a
yeah.
small business to a medium business. If you're exempting them from doing that, it means you're essentially allowing a bunch of people people to exploit each other just for the sake of increasing that number or statistic of
Yes.
jobs. Now, what's particularly interesting is exactly what you said, which is basically just that, like, if people are going to be paid less, does that mean food is going to cost less? Does that mean housing is going to cost less? Does that mean healthcare is going to cost less? If the answer to that question is no, then what the fuck are we talking about here? You know what I mean? Yeah. If they can't exist, what the fuck are we talking about here? This policy is batshit crazy. And I just want to point out that, not to shame you, but if you voted for the DA and you didn't know about this policy, at least you know now. If you did know about this policy, we need to have a conversation, because I'm curious as to how you justify that. Like how you can look at this policy and be like, this makes perfect sense, let's do it. Like and I'm not even being like a dickhead. I'm genuinely curious how one justifies this position, because to me, it's just a way to be like, hey, I'm willing to be a slave because I don't have a job and I need to get a job. When it's like, that's fucked.
Well, to the position of capital, it's a very good position. Capital gets to have more cheap labor, and that's a frame from which they can defend it. And it's just
also, my question is, when does it stop?
Shitty ass frame. Yeah, exactly.
It is. When does it stop? Because if you're gonna say that, like, okay, cool, I'm a medium business, I'm going to be exempt from these councils, and whoever's coming to be under my employment has removed their, not legal rights, but their rights to standard
basic conditions
work
of employment.
Conditions. Yes, basic conditions of employment. Right. Say, for instance, I do that, and then I make a fucking massive profit over the next 5 years, and my business grows into now a big business. Does this mean then I still have my exemption status? Do you remove me from that? Do I then have to fire all of those workers? Or do I have to then now start paying them what the standard rate is? Because a capitalist is going to be like, that's fucked. I made profits because I was exploiting them. Now you're asking me to pay them properly. I'm not going to have as much. So their argument is like, you're going to move me back down to a medium business when I've just grown into a big business. What happens then? Like, what's the plan?
I actually want to find the answer to that question. Like, what determines business size in South Africa? The size of business in South Africa is chiefly defined by its number of employees. Micro 0 to 4, very small 5 to 9, small 10 to 49, medium 500 to 200. And I assume after that, it becomes a large business. But this is from the tradetips.org.za, Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies. That's from their little blurb that appeared in Google. Yeah. So it is headcount based. So I guess they can just ensure that they have fewer than 200 employees at all costs, and then they'll be Gucci. I mean, that's a lot of people. I mean, like, how many companies really need a lot of people? Unless you're like, I mean, also directly employed by the company. You could literally have such a big company that just has so many consultants who's jotting in. They have these people for the cleaning staff. These people for the cleaning staff. These people for these other people. So that this company itself actually has very few employees, even though they all these people that work for the company.
Precisely.
So that, I mean, that it allows for loopholes. It allows for loopholes. Massive loopholes.
And I'm sorry to flex here, but and maybe I shouldn't flex because it means that I should know more. But I actually lectured sociology of work for first years. This was 2 years ago at Stellenbosch University, and I gave a basic debrief on the history of labor, why we work, how we work, and importantly, we got to a section that was specifically about the precarious nature of work, or at least the increasingly precarious nature of work, where work used to be everyone is entitled to a full-time job or a part-time position, and those positions have their benefits as a result of being a full-time or part-time employee, which is, healthcare, retirement fund. They ensure that you're paid the right wage, etc., and so on. But more and more workers in South Africa are actually electing to become contracted, and more companies are actually paying contract workers because it means that they can then pay them less. They don't have to pay healthcare. They don't have to put in retirement funds because those employees are not their employees.
Even like healthcare and all these things, they're not like mandatory to offer your employees. Like my first job, all I got was my salary and I guess a bonus. Now I have, my job has like benefits, like I get certain percentage of my salary goes towards medical aid. I guess the last one also had like a group life policy or whatever, but like that's also benefits the company because if you die, that means they get money. If you die on the job, you get money. So like, I mean, your family does too, sure, but so do they. So yeah. But contractors have even less of a right to want these things. Like, I mean, none of these Uber drivers work for Uber. They're all their own mini little businesses all operating with the Uber app.
Precisely. Actually, what are the implications for a company like Uber, who technically doesn't have any employees? Are they now suddenly allowed to, I guess, decrease the amount that they're paying
now a small
drivers?
company?
Yeah, like, does that qualify? Like, how does that anyway? Or maybe they mean like globally.
Probably would. I mean, there is Uber South Africa. I think there's an Uber
Yes.
SA, like a branch or like division of Uber. So I think they probably only apply it to Uber South Africa. But I guess
Right.
the question is then, okay, what if a company isn't registered in South Africa, but then still has workers in South Africa? Then what
Like
happens?
Amazon, which is coming.
Yeah, Amazon's here, like
They're
.co's
here.
here. Like I
Sorry.
think,
Yeah.
yeah. AWS has been here for a while. They have
Yeah.
offices in Wembley and probably other places, but I know that they like our local marketplace has been open for a few months at this point, I think.
Mm.
No waves made, I don't think. I think Takealot's still got a strong hold on the
Yet.
market.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
how did we
Well,
get
I
there?
mean, and the reason why we bring this up actually that's important is that, like, for instance, Stellenbosch University workers protested a couple of years ago against the university because what the university was doing was essentially firing all the staff members who were on full-term contracts, and they were
Mm.
hiring companies that were sending contracted workers
Yes,
in order to
yeah,
save money. But what that meant is
yeah.
that those individuals who were fired then had to go look for jobs at those companies, which were then like, well, we're
And
going
those
to pay
companies were
you
worse
less.
jobs than at,
Exactly,
yes,
exactly. And so their quality of life was decreased and so on. And so you find that, like,
yeah.
these are very important questions because these are very, like, these are people's lives. Like, these are people's
Mm.
livelihoods that they're ultimately asking to skirt around just in order to increase a number. So that's, yeah, for the listeners, that's a very important thing that we wanted to discuss, specifically with regards to the DA, because I think that's something that, like, is probably the most sketchy for me, that I'm like, yeah, this
Yeah,
is like,
because
I knew I had issues and I know that your policies or whatever, but this is something where I'm like, okay, I can point to this specifically and be like, yeah, this is fucked. This is objectively
indeed
fucked.
it is.
Just to quickly, before we move on to education, I wanted to mention that, like, it's interesting that specifically on job creation, if this is a policy that they're willing to put forward, because, you know, jobs being such a deep issue in South Africa, it means then that the Overton window for that is now shifting slowly towards
Mm.
more, towards policies that are more politically conservative, which is essentially to ensure deregulation. And that's
Mm.
essentially just like what capitalism is. They try to sort of spew this free market capitalism type of thing. And if deregulation is leading to basic slavery, then I feel like that's just something we should be against.
Yes.
Yeah.
Generally, regulation is a good thing. I mean, it makes things hard, sure, whatever, but like there's
Yeah.
probably a reason why this thing is important.
Yeah.
Because without it, like, I mean, capitalists will capitalize.
Exactly. They'll just keep winning the game even more than they're already winning
Yeah.
it. I mean, it's just, yeah, at this point
Mm.
it just seems silly. Okay, so education is the next category. Now, this is going to be a much shorter section. It's not going to be that deep, purely because the ANC and the DA on this are somewhat aligned in that they're not really looking to, it's not revolutionary. Some of the things that I'll go on to explain are very like standard policies, but the more revolutionary side of things is very much towards the EFF and MK. And I think in terms of education, we'll get onto that. But they're like literally looking for a decolonial syllabus. They're looking to introduce Swahili.
Mm.
We'll get into their policies in particular, but the ANC and the DL are not as exciting. So this section is not going to be as like, you know, in depth. So for the ANC, they're looking for universal early childhood education by 2030. That means that in early childhood, every kid should be able to get free education. Universal doesn't imply that every kid is going to get free education. It just implies that every kid should be able to have access to free education. Even if you're super
Access.
wealthy, yeah, and you
Ah.
want to send your kid to free school, then that's what they're essentially saying, that we'll allow that. Obviously, that's not going to happen because rich people tend to be quite, what's the term? They tend to want to pay for things that gives them an advantage in life. And going to a free school will be
I
perceived
mean,
as a
anyone would
loss.
like to do. I mean, anyone who could would. I
True.
think it's not
Yeah,
like yeah.
exactly.
I
So this
think because
accessibility
there are
isn't to
people who
remove
like
that
make
option.
sacrifices and who choose to send their kids to private schools and
Mm,
rather live a less well-off life themselves, just because they
yes,
know that or what that allows for. The
yes,
connection that it
yeah.
allows a kid to have in the future, and yeah,
The networks that they can build
yeah,
and so on.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's not about, so that's the thing. It's not about removing, and this is why I say they're not as radical. It's not about removing, you know, the option of private schools and whatnot. It's purely just to ensure that every kid has the ability to just get educated, which I go, yeah,
Mm.
that's just good. Nice. That's good.
Yeah.
They want to expand skills development in emerging fields such as data analytics and artificial intelligence, which I guess makes sense, but I'm also kind of
I don't
like,
think that makes sense.
okay,
It
so
seems like
what do
you're just
you,
going for a buzzword. I think you're just going like I
yeah.
think it is important to have certain things in those things, but I'm like, but what does that mean? Like what like
Yes.
what like I mean, I don't know. Like do you want to become the AI? Like what does there can only be so many people in data science and AI engineers. Like eventually, I mean,
Precisely.
if this thing is as good as it is, there's going to be a fewer and fewer need for data analysts and AI people. So like you're going to spend all this money to make all these people who are eventually not going to be able to work in the field that they specialize. Like what is the goal for that? Like what is that? Like what does it mean? What does it mean? What do they
mean? And I said it makes sense in the sense that for a political party to have this in their manifesto, because they don't want to seem outdated and old, they want to seem like they're in with the times, they want to seem like they have some sort of importance of whatever. And to be fair, the way you and I view AI and sort of our understandings of it is very different to how other people might be viewing it, especially the rich class who are essentially the fucking investors. They view that as the future. They're like this
cheap labor.
Yes, true, that too. It's
it's
like a future where it's like, well, we don't have to pay as many workers, so let's invest as much into this. So in that sense, it makes sense. This one doesn't seem like it's for us, the people. This one feels like it's very much to like pander towards the ruling class. And then they want to expand vocational training and technical training. Perfect, good, that's important. Build student residences using National Student Financial Aid Scheme funds. Also something that I'm very much for. I've seen this firsthand with students struggling, especially with NSFAS, to pay for res and you know the whole ordeal at uni in South Africa. There's always an issue with funding. There's always an issue with students struggling to get food and whatever, and housing is the most important one. So I think that's just like a cool, well done, nice. But again, this is the ANC saying this, so again,
why don't they do it?
Exactly. Grain of salt every time. And then the DA, they want to ensure that each child gets 210 teaching days a year. I don't know. Can you Google this actually? How many teaching days do South African children get per year?
Around 200 days in South African scholastic year.
Okay. Why do what?
How many do they want?
Adding more. 210.
I feel like around 200 and 210 are the same thing. Why is that in your manifesto? Like,
that's what I'm curious about.
Like, why is that like?
And I don't know. That seems ridiculous.
Wait, but this is from expatica.com.
So in order to not spread misinformation, let's just say that according to this website, the amount of days is 200. So 210 days seems like a weird shift. And we'll change that if we do get new information, if the website decides to start working anytime soon. The next policy that the DA wanted to improve on education-wise is to devote...
Mukisa, down for more than a week. Gov.za has been down for more than a week. How the absolute fuck has the government's website has
like a government website. Aren't they writing exams soon? No, it's early August.
No, not yet. But like, what?
That's raucous, actually.
That is like mind-boggling.
So the DA want to devote the first 2 hours to reading and writing. And this is in particular, I think they said that they want to do this because of their next point, which is to introduce literacy and numeracy tests at the end of the foundation phase. So that's to triple the number of grade 4s who can read for meaning. Basically, they just want to improve South Africa's literacy rate. So they want to devote those first 2 hours of school to reading and writing. I don't know how you sort of enforce that on teachers, and I guess it can be part of the curriculum.
Well, you can set the curriculum, so
Yeah. But private schools can skirt that. Like we had an hour tutor group period thing after like chapel, and it was
that meant to be something else?
No, I mean I don't know what it could have been.
Remember, we didn't have PE because of the whole we did sport at school. There was that requirement to do that like that
LO
assessment thing in LO.
Yeah, that physical assessment nonsense, which called me obese. And this is another thing.
Discovery called me obese like a month ago.
Well,
I was obese. I did a Discovery health check and I was obese. So, well, not obese, but like I was above average. I was above average, and I'm literally weighed like I think I was 86 at that point, and I'm like 182. Shit. I was 80, I was something like,
and that's above
that's above average. So I'm just like, I don't know, like I think I look average, like surely average.
It's just basically my way of saying the BMI it's bullshit.
Yeah.
Because I was anyway. And then they want to promote science, tech, engineering, and math education to strengthen the district model. Now I red flagged this, but not in like a deep red. I've made it like a soft red because I think the implication of promoting science, tech, engineering, and maths immediately sends alarm bells to me as a humanities student. Often conservative organizations want to promote these things in order to remove the sort of furthering of history, geography, and all those things, which I do deeply value. Social sciences are so important. So I was like, So I was like, this is a bit of a red flag. It's just one of those things where it's like, keep an eye out for that. And then I green flagged this. They want to establish school evaluation authorities in every province, like they do have in the Western Cape. I green flagged this not because I understand it fundamentally as to what those evaluation organizations do.
It's Malusi. I've heard of this Malusi chap. I think it's an organization. Let's see. Umalusi is a council that sets and monitors standards for general and further further education and training in South Africa in accordance with the national qualifications ellipsis. Okay. So okay, interesting. Their server's also down. Funnily enough. So I can't tell you what came off the ellipsis.
Yeah, that's hilarious, man. The reason I green flagged this is just because I'm like, I just think, to me, education is super important, but if you're wanting these evaluation authorities to be there in order to just objectively improve education in the sense that you're not wanting to restrict certain learners in such a way that almost makes it unfair. So for example, there are certain disadvantages that poverty introduces into education and teaching and learning. And so what do these evaluation authorities do when it comes to schools that are on the lower end of the financial spectrum versus schools on the higher end, etc.? These are just some of those questions that I have. But in like a sort of initial reading, that's something that I'm like, that seems like a good thing to do. So I get that. Got a new DA. And then just to move on from education and finally get into energy.
But while we're still there, do any of them talk about like more teachers or paying teachers more?
None of them do that. Actually, that's a very important thing. None of them have mentioned teachers. So much like, yeah.
No, actually, because my flatmate, he brought someone over and they were a teacher, and I said so she was a teacher, and she was telling me that it was like it's really hard to find a job as a teacher, apparently.
Yes.
So like, does that just mean there just aren't enough schools then? So should they be saying we need to open more schools, or are there just schools but like fewer jobs for those schools because teachers now have to wear more hats than they used to have to because of like not enough like money?
So
no one was like we need more funding for schools or like that you saw.
No, not that I saw. That wasn't and again, the manifestos doesn't mean that they're not pushing for those things. It just means they don't think it's important enough to put it in, which I think is crazy that that's not important there. I do know a few teachers, because obviously being in the arts and social sciences department, the education department was right next door. We should maybe actually, in some future episode, interview maybe someone that's gone into teaching now. I can already think of a couple people that might be good to just
I know a teacher. I was on the podcast of a teacher. And,
right. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, Murray's a teacher.
Oh, fuck, yeah. Okay, well, then we can bring on. Because I was going to say, much like in the economy discussion, if you're not having a conversation about inequality, in education, if you're not having a conversation about teachers and paying them more and so on, then it's like, you're kind of ignoring a very important aspect of this. So increasing teacher salary, increasing work opportunities, so important. I mean, I see how many education students graduate and do their qualifications to become a teacher, and then they're just kind of like, well, I got this qualification, now I don't know what to do. Many of them go teach in Korea or China, or they teach English elsewhere because that's their only option. A few of them go like to Europe, but it's like kind of nuts that we have this many people that are graduating as teachers, and then they're like, well, let me go do something else. You know? Yeah, because Okay, let's just get to the final chapter, which is energy. It's essentially electricity, Eskom, the whole shebabble. So the ANC, their first claim is that they want to support cheaper and subsidized solar power. I guess, okay.
Yeah.
I don't have anything negative against that. I guess that makes sense. Just like generally, they want to prioritize green technologies, energy efficiency, waste management, climate smart agriculture and infrastructure, and quote, eco-friendly production, end quote. Those are things that I didn't red flag. I did have a bit of a question too, though, because they're very buzzwordy. As someone who works with a couple climate activists, they might read this and be like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, what does that mean specifically? To prioritize, prioritizing green technology, sure. Energy efficiency, waste management, climate smart agriculture, and so on. These are all things that we understand are good things. But often the use of them is to skirt away from ignoring the core issue, which is that a lot of corporations are fucking pillaging the country's arable land, like land that is you can farm with and resources and so on. So whenever I read that and I see those buzzwords without a deeper explanation, it just kind of feels like they said that because they know it's the right thing to say, It's nothing, I don't read too much into it. Their other point was to become a world player in green hydrogen, battery and electrical vehicle production, which I think has interesting implications, especially with the battery and electric vehicle production. As we know, of course, a lot of cobalt mining comes from the Congo. Deeply exploitative, fucking horrendously exploitative thing. And there's a really wonderful book that a friend of mine actually suggested I read that goes into the sort of intricacies of that. But for me, I'm curious about it as to why they want to move that into South Africa. Does that mean we have a lot of cobalt to extract? Does that mean that we're looking to do it in a more, I guess, humane and, the working conditions that are available for workers to be able to actually, I don't know, produce that cobalt in a fair and actually like decent way? Or are we looking to fucking capitalism this shit and make it as, horrendous as possible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think it could also have to do with, because there are quite a few cars that are manufactured in South Africa, and I think those are all just like ICE cars, internal combustion engine cars, and possibly saying that the EV revolution could be bad if we don't do these things. Could be bad for us because less of these kind of cars are going to be sold, so for there's going to be less of these kinds of jobs. So if we promote this other thing, maybe that would equate to the same / more jobs in the sector. But again, where's the cobalt coming from? Are we doing the thing if the cheapest place to get cobalt is from a mine in Congo that doesn't pay their workers much, that's where cobalt's going to get.
That's where they're going to
exactly. There'll be other organizations that no, you see, we don't use slave labor. We promise. Pinky swear, look, we audit everyone. Look, the sheet says so.
Yeah.
Fast forward 2 years later when investigation finds that the sheet was a lie. So it's like,
yeah, absolutely.
I don't know. But I think the preservation of the job market in another kind of car is a good goal, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm in agreement there. I do think this is one of those things, much like the AI thing as well. It feels like it's just one of those things that they just want to say. As we're pandering to the upper ups.
Because I don't think more cars is I think public infrastructure, public transportation is the way to get around the green problem. The problem with, because a lot of batteries is a lot. There's an intense amount of pollution that goes into producing an electric car. I mean, an electric car off the lot has a lot more emissions than a gas car off the lot. You have to use an electric car for quite a while for it to be less polluting than a gasoline car. And on top of that, electric cars use, I think their their tires wear off a lot quicker because of the regenerative braking and the rubber that goes everywhere. It goes into the air and reduces the quality of air. Not saying electric bad. I love electric cars. I think electric cars are super sick, and I think they're a great alternative. If you're getting a car now and you can afford it and it makes sense for you, I think you should go that way. But I don't think that the larger solution for the problem of our transportation causing harm to the environment is one in which we all just replace our gas cars with electric cars. I think we should rather have states, cities, whatever, invest in public infrastructure that doesn't require the use of a private vehicle, that requires more public travel. Yeah,
entirely. Yeah, that was 100%. That was going to be my exact point, which is basically to say that we just need to invest more in public infrastructure. That's it. You don't need to do this, especially like you said, and you made a very good argument there, which is that the pollution that the creation of these cars is going to create, it's going to beget more problems. Whereas just basically paying and improving on public infrastructure, disincentivizing the public to own individual vehicles is the most important key aspect of this. If you truly do want to be eco-friendly, like they said in the point above, then you're kind of not understanding the goal of that. If you're essentially pushing for this new transition, specifically with battery and vehicle production and whatnot.
And it also requires cost, right? If you want to get an electric car, you have to be able to afford to replace your gasoline car.
Yeah, precisely.
So that's a whole other issue. Whereas if it was public infrastructure, you just need to be able to afford the new bus fare or whatever. If you already have a car, I don't think that the bus fare is going to be that exorbitant. You can still use your gas car, sure, if you need to go on a long trip or whatever, but that doesn't require that you buy a whole other vehicle if most of your traveling can be done using public infrastructure.
100%. I've become such a train geek, man. We got a new electric train this side, and my family, every time we drive past it, I'm like, it's a fucking train, let's go. I'm like, this is what we need. We live on the other side of the bay, so we live on the coastline, beach side, but it kind of curves, kind of like in The Great Gatsby. There's a whole curvature, so I can see the other side of the bay. And to get there,
little green dot on the far end.
Yeah, it's reach out. To get to the other side, it maybe takes, if there's absolutely no cars on the road, 25 minutes. But because of traffic and shit, it takes a solid hour and a half maybe to get to the other side. And I go, it's if they put a train here, this wouldn't be an issue. So now they're actually building. So we have this incredible bus system now that they're implementing which is the official government bus system, not just like a taxi rank
Private
bus
operator.
system.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And they're like building it all the way down the highways throughout the entire city.
That is sick.
And I'm fucking like sitting there celebrating. And my dad often looks at me and laughs, and he's like, but you're celebrating in a car. He said, you're in a car. You like cars. And I go, yes, just because I'm forced to live under the conditions of capitalism doesn't mean I have to, you know.
Why do you have an iPhone, Kisa? Fucking buy
what the fuck?
buy
Like, why do I even have a computer? Because socialism equals poverty for everybody.
Yeah.
So I celebrate it because I'm like, you don't understand how much traffic this is going to reduce on these roads, how much congestion this is going to reduce, because most people would want to use that if they didn't have to drive themselves places, which is so good. So yeah, pro public transport for our our group. I mean, we're leftists, it makes sense. And then the last 2 points was they want to develop gas, nuclear, and hydropower projects, which I assume is to improve Eskom's power production. Obviously, the power production is just like a massive issue in South Africa. And then the last thing is
we sell a lot of our coal though as well.
Yes, which is
we
weird.
Export a lot, which is quite like we have our own crisis, but we're still exporting coal.
Yeah.
It's like interesting priorities there, but I mean, we haven't had. I think load shedding's been on a break still, but it's probably going to rear its ugly head again very soon.
Very soon.
I wouldn't be
they
surprised.
Still want to use the political clout. But the EFF actually mentioned in the parliamentary debate, they called Cyril out. They were like, stop lying to your constituents. We sell more coal than we use. And why is that? So the EFF were actually one of the parties that are like, yo, we need to actually focus more on what we're producing and stop selling it to other people. And then the last thing the ANC want to do is to establish a national oil company for refineries, which I'm like, yeah. If it's an oil company and it's national, cool. Obviously, you need to consider the environmental ramifications and considerations.
What are the timelines involved?
Yeah, what are the timelines? True, because that's not an easy, quick thing to do. Like, what does that mean?
Like it's gonna I don't know. Yeah. Should we rather not make like a national, like I don't know, green, somewhat like a national nuclear thing or national solar thing or national wind thing or something that is actually it's going to be more sustainable. But one could argue that you could start with oil, and then transition to something else. But
or they can do both at the same time. But I don't think they have the capability to do so. Like I don't trust their competence in this. And then the DA, I red flagged this because again, much like the deregulation conversation in the economy, they want to quote break up Eskom's monopoly and move the utility away from energy generation.
No. That's going to make power more expensive, though.
Precisely. They also want to privatize power generation. That's one of the...
That's going to make power more... But power, like, people can't afford electricity. Like, what do you mean make power more expensive?
So one of the things...
That's like supply and demand, you know? It's just like, let's just put the demand down because the price is too high. Then it'll be fine. Supply will match demand.
They want to promote self-generation and devolve energy decisions to municipalities. So, okay, this is one of those things where it's like, these guys want to privatize everything. That's their whole shit.
It seems, it's kind of like, because in Cape Town, when I was here in 2020 when there was still load shedding, for university, when there's still load shedding, we were always in the city, we were always like one stage below the national level. And I think that's because the Western Cape itself has its own, or maybe it's just the city of Cape Town. I don't know how wide it extends, but it has its own ability to like get power from, I guess, private power producers or PPP. I don't know. But my issue with that is that like it's a very much we're good, they're not. We're fine. Like regardless of we're not a country of people who are like this problem should be fixed for everyone. Rather, I mean, I get it's like why don't you fix the problem so we don't have to have these little patchworks of people being able to, or municipalities being able to generate their own thing, or rather, if you want to like have decentralized power generation, make that like a thing that is still under like some sort of a national body because it should be something that is nationally important.
Absolutely.
And that shouldn't, I think, devolve into like the power of each municipality or province or whatever.
No, 100%. And I also think and I hate to use the slippery slope argument here, but privatizing something as important as electricity, which I do believe in this day and age is it's one of those, I think, human rights. It's a requirement. Like people need electricity to survive in modern contemporary South Africa, in modern contemporary the world in general, whereas in the past we didn't. If you want to give one of those human rights to private corporations, you're monetizing survival. Because if it's electricity, you're going to want to shift to water, which is something that they want to do as well, by the way. They want to privatize the water systems in South Africa, which it's not on the category today, but it's also something that they want to do. And I'm like, the moment you privatize water, just think about what you're basically saying there. You want to sell a human right, which is obviously going to shift into housing and and this is why I say I'm a socialist and not a communist, in the sense that I don't necessarily believe, much like communism espouses, that every single system needs to be controlled by government. I'm more just very generally skeptical. But when it comes to the essentials, food, housing, shelter, etc., and so like those are the things that I'm like, yes, 100% those should be nationally owned. And this is one of those things where I go to the DA and I say, listen, man, the US are trying to do that shit. It fucking plummeted. Their electrical grid, especially in Texas, has fucked off. Like it's beyond belief the amount of problems that people are running through. The amount of like price gouging that electrical companies are doing on people, like increasing their prices to such an exorbitant fee, and people don't have like any competing powers to sort of fight against that. The government can't deregulate them. It's a whole fucking mess. So this is just one of those policies where I go, yeah, it's the profit motive. And whenever you have the profit motive, it's going to reduce innovation, unlike the sort of argument that you might make if you're a capitalist and say that it increases innovation. So yeah, it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, this is something that you guys, this is a big red flag, like big red flag.
And I wanted to add like that, I guess there's nothing wrong with charging for water and electricity because they both have costs associated with them if you need to charge, sure. But I think that the charges shouldn't be to drive this further profit that's going to accrue to the shareholders of whatever entity.
Yes.
I mean, if there are profits generated from electricity, from selling electricity or water, should they not rather go into the state's coffers?
Exactly.
Should they not rather be for the benefit of the states,
the people,
of everyone in the state, of the people? I think that there are better uses of this profit if it is going to generate it at all.
Yeah, 100%. And I think if you are a DA voter, and I'm speaking specifically to DA voters a lot in this episode because I know a few of you are probably listening, just knowing the sort of circles that we might be in. But if you're a DA voter and you're sort of looking at this and saying, yeah, well, the ANC have done a shit job with Eskom. I'm really tired of, power cuts and all that shit. So my solution is to vote for the DA. The solution is not to vote for the DA because their policy is telling you pretty point blank period that they're trying to privatize the electrical grid, which, as we've just detailed, is just a bad thing to do. It's just an objectively bad thing to do. And so what you want to do is look for an organization, a political party that actually wants to do something beneficial and basically not remove the ability of the power grid to be controlled by the state, but rather to increase its ability to do so and how they do that, basically, like the ability for it to function properly. Because I think we're all in agreement. The ANC have just not done a good job in general. And so how can we basically shift competent people into power that can actually do this job properly? The answer isn't to question the systems. But in this particular instance, the answer isn't to say the system itself is failing. We need to shift towards a completely different system. The answer here is to say, how can we improve on this particular policy? Because the alternative is, I promise you, objectively worse. Like, it is going to be worse. And not just for you, but for everybody, but also including you. Where in the past, most policies that are enacted, like if you live in a certain bracket of privilege, most political decisions that are made don't affect you. In this instance, it will, because electricity costs will increase. And so prices in general will increase for rent, for whatever it might be. And that's going to affect you individually. So that's also a consideration to take in this particular case.
And I think it's quite interesting because in South Africa, because of the state of Eskom, there has been a good utilization of private power producers, like in the, say, the Western Cape's case, so let's take City of Cape Town's case of like lowering the stages down. I think some businesses also are doing this thing, which is like a great band-aid, I think, but I don't think it should be the goal. It's not it's not the thing we should be striving for. We should rather be striving to fix the rot that is infested Eskom and keep a nationally owned utility, and maybe even have Eskom buy out these private power producers because we recognize that this is a thing that shouldn't be driven by the profit motive and should be rather done for the benefit of all.
Absolutely. And I mean, in Tanzania, for instance, we've now recently opened up a very new dam that's like producing the majority of our power. And it's actually going to, once they open up all the, I'm going to say holes because I don't know the technical term of the dam, but at the moment, I believe there's only 2 that are open and it's already producing enough for the entire country. We're going to sell our electricity over to Zambia, I believe, and other countries that might need it, which is like, I'm like, yeah, that's a good thing that we need to do. And it's entirely state-owned. So I'm giving you an example where obviously it took time to get to here. We did have our power cuts. It wasn't perfect, and there were times when it was dreadful. But we've gotten to a point now where we found a solution that is actually benefiting the whole country, and it's still state-owned. So you shouldn't sit there and think, okay, anything that is state-owned or state-run is bad. It's like, no, that's not the conclusion here. It needs to be run well, is the conclusion to reach. But yeah, so that's that. That's the full spiel. And just for the listeners, we will not be getting into the parliamentary debate today. We can get into that another time.
In at least like 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, we need to give this time to like sit so that we can actually do other episodes and other like projects and many things. But I'm actually, it might be kind of cool to do this as like a series where, you know, next time, and by next time I mean next time we want to do this series and not next episode, where we go over the EFF and MK's policies, go over some of the others as well, just to kind of give you guys a deep breakdown on their politics, and so that you guys can return to this if you ever need to, and just kind of get a deeper understanding of South African politics. But for now, that was just a brief insight into the ANC and the DA. We went through their history and how they came about. So if you found that interesting, please do let us know. Hopefully you did. Otherwise, if you didn't, then that's that, I guess.
Come find us. You can don't come find us. It is probably easier to find me than to find you. You can probably figure out where I spend my time if you really wanted to. But do not come find us. Just use the comment box. Use your fingers to fight us. Type in the Substack comment box. Just be like, oh, you guys were so awful. Do da 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 da. You know, do that one. Prefer that one. That's a good. It'll make me feel really good about myself if you do that. I promise you. I promise.
Especially if it's like something that you like disagree with us on. Like if you genuinely think some of the things we red flagged and whatever are, you know, questionable, or you might disagree with it and whatever, then that's perfectly fine. It's okay to be ideologically like not aligned with us. Like that's perfectly okay. But as we've highlighted, like we're leftists, so the majority of our positions are going to come from that positionality, that ideology, and we're trying to give you an insight into why we see this the way that it is seen. And if you see it differently, then you should absolutely let us know, and we can have a conversation with you in the comments section. Don't be mean, we're fragile, but it'll be nice to
and don't be scared. I mean, like, who are we, you know? We decided to speak. Decided to put our opinions, however malformed they may be. I mean, some of them are quite well formed. I say so ourselves. But yeah, feel free. It's open comment box.